Hello guys, welcome back, and today I'm going to be ranking my top 5 worst NHL prospect pools. Now there are some bad prospect pools in today's NHL, but which teams make the bottom 5 and which team has the worst prospect pool in the entire NHL? Watch till the end to find out. Now when it comes to my rules for being a prospect, when it comes to prospects, they can't be over age 24 and they also can't play over NHL or over 30 NHL games. So those are the rules. But when it came to making these rankings and making these teams, I sorted them all in order. I already made my top 5 list. But when it comes to the bottom 5, I mixed both superstar talents and depth prospects. So the teams down the bottom likely don't have too much of either. Now we're going to go straight into it, and at number 5, aka 27th overall in the NHL, I have the Calgary Flames. Now this one is going to be the most controversial, I feel, out of any of these, mostly because I do see some bright spots with the Calgary Flames prospect pool, but overall, I think it's just not as impressive as some other ones. Now when it came to a pool grade, I gave Calgary a C. I also gave their depth a C as well, so it's okay, but not great compared to other NHL team prospect pools. When it comes to their top 5 prospects, at number 1 I have Dylan Dubé. He's a center, having a pretty great season in the AHL. He was probably Calgary's best prospect and has been that way for a long time, but he's a pretty fast guy and will likely be a fringe top 6 guy for Calgary for their future. At number 2 I have Juuso Välimäki. He's a defensive prospect. I'm not as high as some other people on him. I like his offensive game. The defense, I think, falls short in my personal opinion. At number 3, I got Mattias Emilio Pettersson. He has a long name, but he's a pretty underrated prospect. He was a 6th rounder back in 2018, and he's having a great season in the NCAA. I also have Adam Ruzicka at number 4. He has some pretty good offensive potential as well. I like his overall defensive game, though I haven't seen too much of him, admittedly. At number 5, I have Matthew Phillips. He's one of the more older prospects that you'll see on Calgary, but still is a very good prospect in his own right. When it comes to some of Calgary's depth prospects, they have a decent group of guys. You got Tyler Parsons there, Glenn Gaudin, Broman, you got Pospisil, Romansis, and Svenningsson. When it comes to Calgary's depth, I just don't really see it being the great when it comes to other teams, or just comparatively to other teams' prospect pools. Again, I think that top 5 is decent. Guys like Dylan Dubé are good. Välimäki is good also. But I think with the Calgary Flames, it's just kind of a victim of them being good this season. They haven't done a great job, I think, developing at least right now. Some of the guys that they had before in their prospect pool have started to finally go up to the NHL, and some guys have graduated. Guys like Kylington are close to prospects, but I think are over that threshold of NHL games played. So when it comes to the Calgary Flames, it's not that their prospect pool is bad. It was good before, but a lot of guys have graduated and played well on the Flames, which in that respect is pretty good for them. Now going on to number 4, aka 28th overall in the NHL, and at that spot I have the Columbus Blue Jackets. I gave their pool a grade a C, and I gave their depth a C-. And when it comes to the Columbus Blue Jackets, they have some pretty solid prospects, but I think it's kind of a victim of the depth and it kind of falling up short. Now when it comes to Columbus's top 5 prospects, I think they have some pretty solid ones. Now at number 1, I'm going to say Emil Bemstrom. I'm a big fan of him. He's in an amazing season in SHL. He is a right winger, but has had so much offensive impact as a 19-year-old. Big fan of him and should be maybe a first liner for Columbus in the future. At number 2, I have Liam Foudy. He's a center in the OHL for the London Knights, having a pretty decent season so far, even though he has some great teammates also. But he's a speedy young guy and should be maybe a pretty solid top 6 guy for Columbus in the future. At number 3, I have Trey Fix-Lewanski. He is lighting up the WHL both this season and the last one, being a big guy but having a lot of points as well to his name, so he should have a lot of offense to bring for Columbus in the future as well. At number 4, I have Alexander Texier. I've been a big fan of him since his draft year. I think he's like 21. Playing in the Liga this season, he's gotten a ton of points, playing really, really well. Being from France, I cheer for those kinds of things, so I'm a big fan of him, and I think he will be pretty solid. At number 5, I have Paul Bittner. He is with Cleveland right now in the AHL, having a pretty solid season, though he is one of the more older prospects in Columbus's system. When it comes to some of their depth guys, they got guys like Marchenko, Bernie, Stelland, Carlson, Sherwood, and Pecky. But when it comes to some of their depth guys, they lost guys like Marcus Davidson, Vitaly Abramov in those Duchesne and Dzingel trades. So when it comes to some of the depth, it also has to do with Columbus and the moves that they made in the past. With Columbus, they still have an okay prospect pool. I like guys like Bemstrom. Liam Foudy is iffy for me. But when it comes to Columbus's prospect pool, a lot of it just falls in the depth, and it really just not being where it needs to be. But when you've made the playoffs consistently for a long time, like Columbus has, that is bound to happen, so I will give them a little bit of a break since they are a pretty solid team. Now at number 3, aka 29th overall in the NHL, I have the Boston Bruins. I gave their prospect pool a grade of a C- and their depth a C. Now the depth for Boston is solid. I like some of those guys, but when it comes to the superstar talents, that is especially where Boston falls short, and that also is victim to a lot of their solid prospects graduating and playing amazingly in the last couple of years. Now when it comes to the top 5 for Boston, at number 1 I have Urho Vaakanainen. He is a very solid defensive prospect, having a pretty solid year so far with the Providence Bruins of the AHL. He should be pretty solid for Boston going forward, at least offensively. At number 2, I have Oskar Steen. He's had a great season in SHL. He is one of the more older guys, but still has a lot of potential to his name. At number 3, I have Jack Studnicka. He's in the OHL with the Niagara Ice Dogs, having a pretty good season over there, but he is a little bit older, especially when it comes to OHL prospects. At number 4, I have Zach Senyshyn. Always a hard name for me to pronounce. I'm surprised I did it just now. But he has had a pretty solid AHL campaign. Not the greatest, but still pretty young and could provide some offensive talent in maybe Boston's top 6 in the future. At number 5, I have Trent Frederic, who is a center. He's also switching from the Boston Bruins, from the Providence Bruins. So he's kind of that NHL, AHL fringe guy, but I think he has very good potential to be a great third-line center for Boston, at least in the future when guys like Backes and maybe Krejci retire. Now, as said before, Boston's depth prospects are not that bad, I feel. They're actually pretty solid. Now, you got guys like Schenn, Axel Anderson, Luco, Jacob Zboril, you got Kaiser, Cameron Hughes, Lawson. So there are some solid prospects in Boston Bruins system, but when it comes to having those superstar talents, guys like Ryan Donato, who they traded to Minnesota, while I don't think Ryan Donato is a superstar talent, he was definitely number 1 for Boston before they made that Charlie Coyle trade. So it has taken a hit over the last couple of years with the trades that they had made. Again, with that Rick Nash deal a year ago, getting away that first round pick, it has hurt their prospect pool, but there has been some great guys like DeBrusk, McAvoy really coming up and playing amazing with the Bruins over the last couple of years. So again, while they don't have the greatest prospect pool, they had a lot of guys that have played well in the NHL, which that is pretty great for them. Now at number 2, aka the 30th overall in the NHL, I have the Pittsburgh Penguins, and if this is any surprise to anybody, I'm not sure what to tell you, but I gave their pool grade a D, and I gave their depth a D-. And the Pittsburgh Penguins, they have some solid guys that I do respect and I do like, but when it comes to the depth, it's kind of just a result of them being so good for so long, but yeah, it is pretty bad. Now, when it comes to the top 5 prospects, the top 2 guys are guys that I absolutely love. Now, at number 1, I have Filip Hallander. He is a left winger in the SHL this season. I loved him since his draft year. I thought he had so much potential, and I was really impressed with Pittsburgh for taking him. He's been great, and I think he will be a top 6 guy in Pittsburgh's future. At number 2, I have Calen Addison. He is a defenseman in the WHL, I do believe. He hasn't had the greatest season, or at least improving from last season. He's kind of been in that same area, but I still think he has a lot of potential, being one of my favorite guys from the last draft as well. When it comes to those top 2 prospects, it's pretty great, but then it starts to fall down a little bit, and you start to see what I mean. Now at number 3, I have Sam Miletic. He is a pretty solid prospect, not the worst, not the best, but I think he is a pretty respectable player. Probably will be a bottom 6 in Pittsburgh's future. At number 4, I have Linus Oland. He is a player for the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. Should be a decent player, maybe a little bit older than some prospects. At number 5, I have Jesse Believre, or Believre. He is an interesting prospect. I'm not sure what to really think of him right now. He went undrafted in his draft year. He is playing pretty solid this season with the Lethbridge Hurricanes, so he should be a decent player, but again, I'm just not sure if he has that true bona fide NHL potential. Now, when it comes to some of their depth guys, you can kind of notice at this point that it's probably not going to be the greatest, and you'd be correct with that assumption. Now, you got guys like Gerard, Almeida, Zachary Lozon, you got Clayton Phillips, and Bjorkqvist, but again, there's just not a ton of depth there, and when it came to making these rankings, when it came to ranking these teams, I did like when teams had superstar talent, but I also like when they had a lot of depth that had NHL potential, and I can't really say that with a lot of those guys. While a lot of them are closer in the AHL and stuff, I just don't see a lot of those guys having one, NHL potential, and two, actually making an impact in the NHL, which does a lot for me. If a team has a lot of prospects that are depth, qualified as depth, past the top 5, that still could be impact NHL players, that raises them quite a bit, and the Pittsburgh Penguins obviously don't have that. But it's not really a fault of the Pittsburgh Penguins. They've been so good for so long. They've traded a lot of their picks over the last few years. It's not really their fault. They can't really grow too many prospects because they're in the position to not have the greatest prospect pool. They're in the position to win Stanley Cups, and they have in the last decade. They've been fantastic in doing that. But when it comes to the Pittsburgh Penguins, again, expecting a team like that to have the best prospect pool is kind of unfair. And the position that they're in, they really don't have to have that kind of prospect pool. It would be nice for them to have, but right now, I will give them that break. Now, the worst prospect pool in the entire NHL at number 1, overall 31st in the NHL, I have the Washington Capitals. And I am a Caps fan myself, and it pains me to do this, but the Capitals are kind of in that situation right now. Now, I gave their pool grade a D-, and I gave their depth a D-. And again, the Washington Capitals have a bad prospect pool, but they're kind of in the same situation as the Pittsburgh Penguins, where they kind of have Cups as a bit of an excuse. Now, when it comes to their top 5 prospects, at number 1, I have Alexander Alexeyev. He's a pretty solid prospect in the WHL, having a pretty good season, ended up having a pretty bad injury, but he will still be a pretty solid defenseman for, hopefully, for Washington for years to come. At number 2, I have Riley Sutter. He is a right winger carrying that Sutter bloodline, but he's in the WHL also. Is a pretty solid prospect. Probably not going to be a top 6 player for Washington, but could be a pretty solid role player for them. At number 3, I have Ilya Samsonov. I think he has one of the best potential instead of any goalie prospect, but the thing is, he's had a pretty rough season in the AHL up to this point. He has been a lot better since 2019 started, but it still is not where it needs to be. At number 4, I have Garrett Pylon. He's a pretty solid prospect, though the name kind of determines that a little bit, but I still think he's going to be pretty solid. He's a center also. And at number 5, I have Martin Farabee, or Verabey, I don't even know what to say his name anymore, but he's a defenseman also, having a pretty solid season, but he should be a pretty solid defenseman for Washington. Maybe not a top 4 guy, but a solid NHL defenseman nonetheless. When it comes to the Washington Capitals depth prospects, you got Cody Clark, who was a second rounder last year. He's a decent forward prospect. You got Lucas Johansson, who was with the Hershey Bears, the AHL team. Solid defensive prospect, is a little bit older too. You got also Beck Mellenstein, who is a pretty solid prospect as well. Should be a decent player for Washington. And last but not least, I got Singlehaler, who had played some games with Washington already this season, is a pretty solid defensive shutdown guy. I think he'd be a great guy or defensively for the Washington Capitals in their top 6 for the future. But that's pretty much the extent of the Washington Capitals depth when it comes to prospects, and all in all, it's just not all that great. And again, that is perfectly fine for the Washington Capitals. They literally have zero reason to have a good prospect pool. Winning that Stanley Cup, being such a competitive team for pretty much the past decade, they have all the excuses and all the reasons to have the worst prospect pool in the NHL. And those reasons are pretty justified. Again, having that one cup, making the playoffs, and trading their first round picks almost every single year at one point. So the Capitals have been having some pretty decent prospects over the last few years. Some of those guys have graduated, but when it comes to the Capitals and their prospect pool being that bad, it really is no surprise. Now, since I did a top 5, and of course this video being the top 5 worst prospect pools, I'll probably release my entire overall prospect pool rankings on Twitter. I'll also likely do an updated one after the draft in the offseason, so look out for that. But when it comes to this series, it's been pretty fun, and of course ranking the prospect pools was always hard, so I hope you guys enjoyed the rankings. But of course, with this video, I want to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments down below. So let me know, what do you think about my top 5 worst NHL prospect pools? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know your top 5 worst prospect pools as well. And of course, the question is up to you. Which team do you think has the worst prospect pool in the entire NHL? But if you guys want some more grab videos just like this one, you can click on this card right here to watch my video about the Vancouver Canucks, and if they got both Jack Hughes and Quinn Hughes. But that is going for today, guys. If you guys did enjoy, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Again, comment down below your thoughts on my top 5 worst prospect pools in the NHL and what yours would be also. And I'll see you guys in the next video or stream. Goodbye.